Hello, hello, and welcome to the Skeptic Track. Thank you so much for joining us. There was a refresher app. The updates should download. But this is Honey Honey. Hans House is a professor of emergency medicine and a close personal friend of mine. So please give him your attention. I can't wait. This is going to be good.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, and Angie, thanks for having me. This talk is on honey. This is about honey as medicine. Does it work? What does it work for? And we'll talk about the production of honey and bees and all sorts of cool stuff that go with them. A little bit of the history of honey as well. So if you do it like just a Google search and you look at like honey as medicine, or you look at honey for different conditions, pretty much somebody has suggested honey for pretty much every condition out there. And the level of evidence is really variable. In most cases, pretty thin. So I'm not really going to go into like too much detail. I don't want to. I can't go through like every study or every purported use for honey, but most of them there really isn't sufficient evidence. So I'm going to focus specifically on areas where there's been randomized controlled trials to really test honey as medicine. And there's several areas that there really is some data, and in some cases pretty good data, for allergy relief, as a cough suppressant, as use as an antibiotic, and as wound healing. And we'll go through each of those throughout the talk, but interspersed, we're going to talk a little about the history and the culture of honey. Humans have been collecting honey from bees from pretty much as long as there have been humans, and we know that the earliest documentation of honey collecting is from 8000 BC near Spain, and this is a cave painting which shows a human figure on a ladder with some insects or flying things around them, and trying to get to like an object on the cliff wall, and it's probably representing collecting like collecting a hive from a cliff dwelling colony of bees. By the way, the QR code that's on here has all of the references and links, and I'll show it again at the end as well. In terms of actually like cultivating or like managing bees, probably first began in Egypt in about 4000 or 4500 BCE. This is a detail from a tomb near Thebes, and if you look closely here, there is clearly a figure with a bunch of flying insects around, what maybe are stacked honeycombs, and collecting those honeycombs and putting them kind of in a jar, in a pot. So we know that there was honey that was used in ancient Egypt, and we know for certain because honey was actually found in King Tut's tomb. It's funny, actually, I kept seeing that reference that honey was found in King Tut's tomb, so I couldn't track down exactly the original reference. So I did actually went back to the catalog, from the original excavation, and I found this, and it was like object number 505 or something like that. And this is a vase, a terracotta vase, and it had a sticky substance in the bottom of it, which was thought to be honey. That honey was still edible. It was still actually intact. Honey doesn't go bad, ever, which is pretty remarkable. If you have a sealed jar, it can last on your shelf for indefinitely. The reason for that is it's low in moisture, it's high in sugar, and has a relatively low pH. So really nothing can grow in that environment. Like there's no microbes that can really thrive or multiply in that environment. There's been documentation of honey or beekeeping culture in other civilizations as well, in Greece, in Maya, and in China as well. In all these cases, they probably would have used a hive something like this, and this is the classic sort of skep hive design that you think of when you think of like a classic design of a beehive. And the idea is that you have this hive out, and you basically attract a colony of bees to take up residence in it, and then collect their honey. This beehive is a common symbol. In fact, the beehive state, which is Utah, recently changed their state flag to make a symbol like this. They actually have a beehive on their state flag, as well as out there on the steps of their capital. The bee was seen as like a symbol of industriousness, of a group of organisms working together for a common goal. Now, the problem with the skep hive, however, is that to collect the honey, you've got to destroy the hive. So it's kind of hard to like recreate or keep the bees from season to season if you're using this type of hive. And the big advance with beehive design came from two people, one from Huber in Switzerland and Langstroth in the United States, and around the early and mid 19th century. Huber was remarkable. Huber was completely blind, yet he made some of the most important advances in bee natural history. He had a partner that would help him observe, and he made detailed notes, and he discovered that the queen is fertilized when it leaves the hive on a mating flight. He also had a design for a hive that had like these leaves in it, like a book, like opening it like a book, and allowed him to observe his bees. Langstroth's big advance was discovering the bee space. Bee space is a distance. Bees won't make hive comb, won't make comb to fill a gap if the gap is less than 9 millimeters. So that space between us, between the width of a bee and 9 millimeters, is called bee space, so 5 to 9 millimeters. If you put your frames that 7 millimeters apart, bees won't build the honeycomb and end up blocking the hive, those frames in. So a Langstroth hive allows you to basically just pull out the frame anytime you want and look at it. This is the design of the hive that we use today. So it was invented in 1850, and it's been pretty much the same ever since. So what about honey as medicine? Well, the first one we're going to deal with is allergies. My wife and I wanted to learn more about beekeeping and try keeping bees. So we went to a bee class at the local nature center. And we all gathered around, and at the beginning of the class, they went around the room and they had like a break, like a icebreaker. We had to like talk about why you wanted to keep bees. And this one woman stood up who was very sure of herself and says, "Well, I want to keep bees because I've got bad allergies, and I want to raise my own honey so that I can treat my own allergies." I'd never heard that before, but like, okay, that's interesting. Sure. So I looked into this. The interesting thing about treatment of allergies is immunotherapy is a well-known treatment. I myself had allergy shots when I was a kid. That idea of introducing a little bit of the allergen to the body so that you desensitize to it is effective. It works. It does work. But usually it's given as shots. Now, I didn't like getting a bunch of shots as a kid, and nobody does. But there's actually a sublingual version of this, a sublingual version of the allergy shots. You take like basically a tab under your tongue and dissolves, and then you basically get the same effect as having the shots. It does work. There was a meta-analysis review of Cochrane database. I'm going to refer to Cochrane a lot during this talk. The Cochrane database is a database of meta-analyses of basically a bunch of studies put together to try to make one big study. And in the Cochrane database, it showed that the sublingual therapy actually works. Reduces symptoms by about half. That's not great, but it definitely works. So the biochemical idea that you could take and eat honey, which has pollen and nectar and is made of substances from your garden, where you have stuff that you're allergic to, biochemically that actually makes sense. And there is good evidence for like actually doing that with like an actual like refined immunotherapy like pill. Now, if you do the same thing with honey, it doesn't actually work. There has been 3 randomized controlled trials. 2 showed no benefit. 1 had like mild benefit. But the honey is going to taste a lot better, and it would actually be cheaper too. So there's that. So probably not very effective for allergy treatment. So how do you make honey? How do bees make honey? They go out and collect nectar. So bees, when bees go to flowers, they're looking for nectar. Nectar is a sugary liquid that's inside the flower. The pollen that they collect is kind of a secondary thing. The bees do eat it for protein, but the flower is really there to try to get the bees to take the pollen to other flowers. But what the bee wants for the honey is the nectar. It goes back to the hive, and it has the nectar in its bee stomach, in its honey stomach, and it regurgitates it back up, and it passes it to another bee, who then takes it and passes it to another bee, and passes it to another bee, and that kind of thing. And they're basically transferring it along a chain. And then as it's going along, it's being worked on by enzymes in the bee's stomach, and eventually it's deposited into the cell, and it's still has a relatively high water content. So the bees use their wings and fan it off and basically like dehydrate it, basically blow off some of the water, and then it kind of reduces down. And then when it's basically the honey that we know today, then the bee covers it, seals it in the wax capsule. Pretty amazing process. So honey really is bee vomit, but really nice bee vomit. So what's in the bee vomit? It's mostly sugar. About 2/3 of it is basically sugar, fructose, and glucose. A lot of it, of course, is water. And then there is a tiny sliver of it just says minerals, vitamins, and enzymes, basically other stuff. That's really, really important. It's a tiny percentage of what's actually in the honey, but it does vary. And it varies depending on what the bee is collecting from. And that will change. That will change the color of the honey. It'll change the flavor of the honey. And as we'll get to, sometimes the properties of the honey, or uses of the honey. This is me at my house in Iowa, where I have a couple of beehives. And we have a lot of herbs in our garden. We have a lot of oregano, and this is thyme. And the thyme is always blooming around the time of the honey flow. Honey flow is when the bees are making the most honey, and you can get them to produce a little bit extra that you can collect yourself. And this was our harvest a couple years ago. Absolutely gorgeous honey. It was really beautiful. So that's what thyme honey looks like. And this thyme honey is particularly clear. It looks good. I think it tastes fantastic. There's different types of honey. In this area, you might have tubalo honey. This is made from the white tubalo tree. And this is apparently the subject of the movie Yuli's Gold, which I didn't actually see, but so I've heard. Acacia honey is made from the black locust tree, not the acacia tree. But acacia honey is famous because it has a low crystallization point. What that means is that it just won't crystallize. Honey, when left alone, won't go bad, but it will crystallize. And crystallized honey is not bad. You can still eat it. It's just hard. Or you heat it up and melt it down, and then you can use it like regular honey. But acacia will last as a liquid for longer than most. And then finally, most famously, is Mucuna honey. Mucuna honey is made in New Zealand from the tea tree. New Zealand, the land of hobbits. And Mucuna honey is famous because it has purported immunologic properties. And as we'll see later on, some of those claims about Mucuna honey may actually be true. What about honey for cough suppression? If you've ever had a cold, you've had an annoying little cough, maybe you've had tea with honey, or maybe take a little teaspoon of honey, and it seems to soothe your throat. So does that work? Can you do it for, like, say, give it to kids? This is kind of controversial in terms of there's basically data on both sides. It's been studied a lot. And some of the studies have a title like, honey improves cough in children compared to no treatment. And the other headline says, multiple center studies show no benefit of nocturnal cough and sleep quality in kids. So what does the meta-analysis say? What does it say? What does the meta-analysis say? What does it say when we take all of these studies put together? And Cochrane took 6 randomized control trials, which basically meant they have about 900 kids to compare. And they found that honey was very effective when it was compared to nothing. It was compared to placebo. So when it was compared to like no pharmacologic aim, basically just like a sweet, or like, I don't know. I'm not sure what the placebo was, actually. I should look at that. But compared to placebo, it was definitely effective. It was probably better than Benadryl. I wouldn't necessarily give Benadryl to young kids unless you really want to make them sleepy, which you might, I suppose. And Robitussin also basically the same. It works the same as Robitussin. We don't recommend using Robitussin in kids. Even the Robitussin children's formula is not necessarily effective. So we would generally recommend honey over this. So basically, yeah, you could use honey for cough. It might work, it might not, but it's definitely cheap, definitely tastes good, and it's safe. However, you don't want to give it to a kid less than 1. Why? Yes, infantile botulism. And this is really a thing. This really exists. So little babies can get botulism, a paralytic disease, from honey. Now they can get it from other things. It's not just honey. This was discovered in the 70s in an outbreak of botulism in California, and there were 43 cases of infant botulism. 13 of those cases, they know that the patients had consumed honey, and some of the samples in those households of the raw honey that they were testing, they did in fact contain botulism spores. So it happens. This is a very recent map. This is data from 2019, and showing that California is a place where it happens the most often. There were 152 cases in 2019. So it's a really rare disease, but it does actually happen. Why can adults eat raw honey? Why can you eat my thyme honey that I've had in my closet for like 5 years, and you'd be fine? And why would I not want to give it to an infant? What's the difference? Difference is a couple things. Babies have less stomach acidity. That's important. What breaks this stomach acid is our first line of defense, and it'll break down some of the things that we eat. Also, they just have less immune systems. They can't respond to infections very well. But the real key is the gut flora. So I was taught when I was first learning biology that the gut bacteria is a commensal organism, basically a parasite, or basically a organism that is dependent upon us, human, for its environment, but we don't get any benefit from it. And I think we're learning a little bit more now that we think it's more of a mutualism type of situation where the gut bacteria does give us some benefit. For one thing, it produces vitamin K, which is pretty important. And babies don't have this same original, they don't have this gut bacteria when they're born. They have to kind of develop it over time, which is why babies, when they're first born, don't have vitamin K. So giving a vitamin K shot, which is a vitamin, is actually pretty important. But kids, if a baby eats something that's soil or dirt, something that has botulism spore in it, and yes, potentially honey, they can potentially get this disease. Another interesting event occurs when we talk about the source of the honey. If you let your bees feed on rhododendrons, this produces, the rhododendron species will produce something called gerotoxins. Their gerotoxins are in the nectar, and that gets into the honey and makes something called mad honey. Now, if you, I'm just going to, not going to make spoilers, but if you know, you know. And if you don't know, go see the movie. Okay, no more about that. Mad honey. Really interesting history. And I put a link in the notes and the references to a really great article on biological warfare and mad honey. It's actually a thing. And there's actually an account from ancient Greece, from 401 BC, where the warriors came across some beehives in what would be modern-day Turkey. There were left there. There's a lot of rhododendrons in Turkey, and Turkey today is a place where they produce mad honey is still actually produced intentionally as a recreational drug. And a number of beehives were there, and the soldiers ate the beehives, ate the honey out of the beehives, and they became very, very sick. And they were like madmen, and some persons like at the point of death, and they were overwhelmed by their opponents. In 946, and I love this story, 946, Queen Olga of Ukraine was fighting against the Russians. Yes, even back then too. And she made mead using mad honey and sent it as a gift to the Russian soldiers, who then basically got so drunk and so like completely wasted and couldn't even function that she sent her army in and slaughtered 5,000 of them. So, yeah, good job, Olga. This is an amazing picture. Again, also in the references, there's a link to an article with these fantastic photos of these honey hunters. This is the Gurung people of Nepal, and they collect honey from these giant bees that live on this cliff wall. It's really, really awesome. But anyway, this gerotoxin that's in the rhododendron is a sodium channel poison. Basically, keeps the CNS sodium channel open, so your nerves just don't function as well. And people complain of dizziness and lightheadedness, as well as hallucinations. What about using honey as infections? Now we know honey has antibiotic properties. Again, unless you're basically a botulism spore, you're not going to survive as a bacteria in honey. So can you use honey as an antibiotic? Well, no, not really. You can't just ingest it, because then you just break it down. It's just basically you break it down to sugars, and you don't get any benefit of the antibiotic. But if you put it on a surface, like say herpes on the lip, or mouth sores from different viruses, or if you have like a sinus problem, or you're trying to eradicate methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, MRSA, from the nose, these are all surfaces where you could actually apply honey, maybe even for vaginal yeast infections, I suppose. These are all things that have been tested in studies, and in all cases, basically, honey sort of works, but the regular produced pharmaceutical works better. So it doesn't have any benefit. So if you really like the idea of a honey-based cosmetic, there is this product. Gisu is a honey-based lip oil and many other things. And there's other honey-based products out there. Honey is kind of a luxury good. And honey is also associated with luxury. Cleopatra was supposedly bathed in donkey's milk and honey. There's not really a lot of good evidence for that, but the Egyptians definitely used honey-based cosmetics for sure. And Pliny the Elder in Rome described Nero's wife as bathing in donkey's milk. So the theory was there. The elements were actually there. And the Israelites were promised a land flowing with milk and honey. So when they carry their ark into the promised land, this is what they were seeking out. And what's that beam coming out of there? Lightning, fire, power of God, or something, right? Yeah. So Napoleon liked these. So this is Napoleon's brooch that he used for his robe. Had bees on it, and if you look really closely at his robe, there's the gold little flecks are actually bees. At the time, France was still had fairly recently gotten rid of the Bourbon dynasty, and the Bourbon dynasty had the fleur-de-lis as their design. So they were looking for the government was looking for a slightly different design, and they found a cache of hundreds of these gold bees in a tomb of the very first emperor of the Franks. And so they thought that was a cool thing. So Napoleon signed up for it. And so Napoleon made that his symbol of bees. Honey is, of course, associated with love, hence the ABBA song, Honey, Honey. Also, when you walk in the door, you're going to say, "Hi, honey, I'm home." Right? You call your lover honey. This is a painting from Germany, from Middle East Germany, called "Cupid Complained to Venus," and it depicts an ancient Greek poem, in which Cupid complains of the painful stings of the bees, and Venus, says, "Well, they're just like the little arrows that you shoot at lovers. There's little stings." And in the picture, you have Cupid is holding a honeycomb, and he's covered kind of in bees that are like stinging him, that kind of thing. You think about, like, you would say a honeyed tongue would be someone that you might use to woo a lover. Honeymoon. Honeymoon is the initial period of a marriage. Some say it is linked to a Viking ritual where they would drink mead to celebrate the marriage. That's possibly true. But also, when it first shows up in English literature in about 16th century or so, it's meant to refer to the sweetest time of marriage. And honey has also been used as a metaphor for sex. This is a quote from Hamlet. Hamlet has just killed Polonius behind the curtain, and he's there with Gertrude, his mom, and he's basically like dressing down Gertrude and calling her really bad names, and accusing her of bad things. And he says, "In the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty." What about mead? What's mead? So mead is it's a alcoholic drink that's based on honey. It is very ancient. The most ancient alcoholic beverage recipe is beer, and it comes from ancient Egypt. But humans probably made mead before that, at least by accident, because it's really easy to make mead. To make mead, you take honey, and you mix it with water, and you wait. That's it. So honey has all the sugar, and natural honey, from a dirty hive, whatever, is going to have plenty of like dirt and yeast and stuff in it. So you just take the hive, take the honey from the hive, and you put it in a jar, and you mix water with it. Over time, you'll get mead. There's a lot of other really fancy ways of making mead and adding different flavors to it. You can try some different meads over at the Marriott. There's a stand for a mead cellar. It's pretty cool. This is mead I've made. This is the one that I made along with some apples that grew in our yard as well. It's probably my favorite production. And this is one of the legends about the origin of mead. In Norse mythology, this god Kazvir was made from a bowl, from a communal drink. So the Aesir and the Vanir were having a war, and they fought, and they sealed their truce by chewing berries and spitting into a communal bowl. Now that actually makes sense for a couple reasons, because that's actually how you could make a alcoholic beverage. Because if you have the berries, which have sugar, and your saliva, which basically kind of breaks down that starch into simple sugars, and you put it together, spit and sugar and fruit juice in a bowl, it eventually would actually become an alcoholic beverage. Well, in the legend, they spit into a bowl, and that blood then became the god Kazvir. He was the god of wisdom. He was so wise that he would know the answer to any question. Well, a couple dwarves captured him and killed him. And they cut him open, they basically drained his blood, this knowledgeable blood, and they mixed that blood with honey, and it became the mead of poetry. It was a mead so special that you could drink it and you become a skald, you become a wise scholar just from drinking mead. Drinking mead doesn't make you smarter. It makes you think you're smarter. Yes, it does make you a better dancer. That's definitely true. All right. Lastly, I want to talk about honey as wound healing, and I really do want to emphasize this point because this is where honey really shines. It's been studied a lot, and studied a lot because it's been pretty effective. In the Cochrane database, there's 26 trials. That's a lot. 3,000 total patients. Half of those being specifically looking at burns. Honey, when applied to burns, the burns heal 4.5 days faster than conventional treatment. That's really good. In terms of other wounds, it's okay. It's probably just as good as conventional treatment, just had some lower rates of side effects. But in burn wounds, it's really good. And so the FDA has actually approved multiple honey products for the treatment of burns, as well as some other wound-related indications. And these are honey-based pharmaceutical products. What's an alternative medicine that's been proven to work? Medicine. So that's what honey is in this case. And in most cases, they're using Mucuna honey. Whether or not that makes a difference is maybe. I did find one study that looked at the immunologic basis for why mucuna honey seems to be so effective, and there seems to be some stimulation of the cytokines. So basically, the immune kind of mediators are stimulated by some sort of chemicals in the honey, which is pretty remarkable. But one of the reasons that honey works so well is that it's benign, that it is not toxic to the new cells. When you have a burn, when you have a wound, you have a destruction of the epithelium of the skin. When you've got exposure of the dermis or the lower parts of the skin tissues, you've got new and living cells. The skin that you have is intact skin, which is extremely effective and extremely good at what it does, which is a barrier, and it keeps your liquids inside your body, and it keeps other things out. The surface of that is dead. There's like the surface of your skin is dead epithelium. But once you get inside into the upper layers of the skin or the deeper layers of the skin, that's all very much alive, and there are new cells being formed. And one of the things that honey is really good at doing is it protects those new cells without actually doing any harm. And other products like Silvadene, which is like a white silver-based ointment, that does some injury to those new growing cells. And I think one of the reasons that honey is more effective is it just kind of leaves them alone. It actually is a more supportive environment. So take home points of this. Most claims about honey are complete bunk or just haven't really been studied enough. It's probably fine to use honey for cough. It might work. Should not be given to infants under 1 year of age. Honey is extremely effective for wound healing, and I really think it should be considered for kind of wider routine use. If you're, say, on the board deciding like which medicines to give a benefit or list as a benefit or list as a pharmaceutical product, I think I would definitely include honey-based products as something that you should ensure. I will be using more honey-based products after doing this talk for wound healing. Humans have had a close relationship with bees for thousands of years, and the sweetness and the joy that you get from eating honey is reflected in our language and our culture. Thank you.
So we have some time. We have a microphone. Don't touch it, please. If anyone has any questions. There's a lot of information, emergency medicine information and alternative medicine information that we both know. Or he also gave some great talks on lunacy and the moon and werewolves and such.
Hey there.
Hello.
So I'm a professional chef, and so I burn my hands a lot, and so do my coworkers. And just anecdotally, we have seen a lot of people have different like immediate remedies for the burn pain. One being like Dijon mustard and tomatoes, and another one that I've been seeing more commonly is honey. And so I think it's interesting that now you were telling me like there's actual scientific backing for that rather than just my buddy being like, put some honey on it.
No, it definitely has a higher level of evidence than Windex, for example, for sure. But yeah, I think that sounds great. I would definitely encourage you to use honey like that. I would be.
Hello, Dr. House. You have clarified some things for me that I have been overly skeptical of. I remember a case it was like a dozen years ago where a small child passed away from terrible infections from eczema. And I was sitting there trying to Google it to find details, but okay. I figured I'd ask you if you remembered that case, because what I remembered from the sensational, the media coverage was that the parents were found guilty of manslaughter because they only used homeopathic remedies, and I thought honey was one of the things that they were using for this young, I believe it was a girl that
Yeah, I'd have to look at the details of the case to comment further, but that's very interesting. But I will try to dig that up.
The studies on infections and burns, do they cover eczema at all, if you recall?
Not specifically. Let me look at my slide because I did actually list a few of the. I
didn't mean to put you to work.
I listed the FDA indications, which is actually relevant. So okay. if it has the FDA indication, which was FDA approved for first and second degree burns, acute wounds, surgical healing, pressure sores, and diabetic ulcers. So allergic reactions is not one of the things that it's indicated for.
Okay.
If it has an FDA approval, that means that some company went to the FDA and said, these are our trials showing that it's safe, and these are our trials saying that it doesn't suck that bad that it's not useless.
Okay.
Notice that I didn't say it works. That's
Yeah.
not what FDA approved
Okay.
meal means.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's better than what
Yeah.
the supplements get, which is
Yes.
this is a thing in a box you can
Yep.
buy.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Well, another thing, I'm sorry, hello.
Did not say this. Here, you can use this, Maggie.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm
Here,
supposed to be able to use. Oh, there we go. So it could be that some of the products may be contaminated, and so that may or may not have had anything to do with that particular case. But again, we don't know the specifics, so it's hard to comment. So anyway, next
Yeah.
question.
Well, thank you. Fantastic talk. Very informative. Really enjoyed it. And I apologize if you mentioned this earlier and I missed it, but what are your thoughts on using like local honey for allergies?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I covered it at the very beginning, but basically, biochemically, it should work. There is a basis for fact for that because we know that honey has stuff from what the bees are collecting, pollens and that kind of thing. So the allergens are in the honey. And if you're eating local honey, so I'm not talking about mass-produced honey that you're going to get from Costco that was probably produced in 10 states away. But if you're eating, go to a farmer and you get from somewhere near you live, you're going to have local allergens in that honey. And you can probably take it as immunotherapy, where you're taking like a dose of it every day, kind of day. And there are pharmacologic products that do that and that are sort of effective. It was actually been studied. It doesn't seem to work very well, but biochemically it should work.
Great.
There's a basis for it, actually. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So, I was also a little late to the party, so you may have already addressed this, but I've heard that honey doesn't go bad. That like if you find like an ancient jar of it, you can eat it. Well, you're nodding, so that answers my first question was if it's true.
Absolutely true.
And why is that?
Yeah, no problem. It's okay, and I'm happy to repeat this because I think it's the coolest thing ever. So honey found that was 3,000 years old was still edible. I don't know how good it was, but I mean it was still edible. The reason that if you have the jar and you seal it, then it won't go bad ever. It has to do with how the stuff is made originally by the bees, but mostly what the actual content is. And so the actual honey content is really high in sugar, and it's also low in pH and low in moisture. Nothing's going to divide in that. Now, stuff can exist in that, so spores can live in that because spores are designed to basically seal themselves off and not interact with the world. That's how botulism survives as a spore. But bacteria can't divide and form new bacteria, or fungus can't divide and form new fungus in that environment where the honey is.
We had
I'm so sorry.
Go, please.
A little bit earlier, you were talking about some of the history of honey and how humans were interacting with honey. But I don't believe you mentioned anything about honey guides and how we sort of... I know that they exist, and I know that we have a symbiotic relationship with honey guides in certain areas of Africa, but I don't have any insight into like how that happened.
Okay, that's cool. Tell me more. What do you mean?
Okay, what I am aware of...
I believe you. Go ahead.
What I'm aware of is that there's a kind of bird called a honey guide. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, now I know what you're talking about. Yes, that's a thing. That's a real thing. So before honey was domesticated or before hives were collected, because bees, that's complicated, but we'll get to that. Okay, that brings in a whole other thing. So yes, before they had hives, humans had to go find the beehive wherever it was in the wild, which is basically if they see a bee, they follow a bee. And there's actually this really kind of cool like older like textbook about like how do you actually like track a bee, which is kind of you like look they have to go to water sources at some point. So you hang out at a water source and you see a bee, you follow the bee. And so humans would basically stumble across these caches of honey of these hives, and one of the things that they found was there's this bird that tends to, and I don't actually know, does it feed on the bees? I'm not sure. I don't know much about the bird, but yes, that's a real thing. And then ancient humans would have followed that bird to try to find where the bees are. when I say I avoid saying the word domesticated bees because some authors would argue that bees are not domesticated. They're still wild. We're just kind of managing their wild behavior. Bees. Now we've certainly bred bees for different qualities. So from that standpoint, we've domesticated bees. For example, we've bred bees that are more productive of honey and that are more gentle. And this is I am not making this up. This is totally true. Different hives have different personalities. One of my hives, absolute sweethearts. They're great. I go up in the hive. They can walk on my arm. Everything's fine. The other one, a total bunch of bitches. They sting me no matter what I do. It's crazy. So it's just weird. So it's and you've heard about African bees. They're not African bees. They're Africanized bees, and they're actually not from Africa. They're from Brazil, and they're a particularly aggressive strain of bees. They're around. It just means that some hives are more aggressive than others. That's the bottom line. Also, they can be triggered by spells and other things too. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm glad you could get away with that. That's a great joke for this crowd anyway. Okay, no other questions? No? Okay. Well, I love when the hornets, the giant hornets, like the bees would get around and kill it by flapping their wings and driving up the temperature. Are the beehives themselves, when they're fanning do they actually increase the temperature on purpose?
Yes, they can. So that's a thing. They can gather around the hornet and kind of like try to isolate it. Mostly, bees protect the hive by numbers, by basically like massing against their enemies. And their enemies might be hornets, but they also might be wasps and be spiders, different things. They're trying to get in to get whatever's in the hive. One really interesting phenomenon occurs in the summertime. I come out when it's really hot and really humid, and the entire outside of the hive is covered with bees because the base has gotten too hot inside. So they're actually they've sent some sort of pheromone signal to say, hey guys, it's too hot in here. Or girls, because they're all female. Girls, go outside. You got to like fan things off, and the whole outside of the hive is then covered with these bees that are flapping their wings, and it's basically like bee air conditioning. It's wild.
That's amazing. Okay. Are they coming? No. Okay. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I'm so sorry about the app, but hopefully it's all refreshed now. But we'll see you again at 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock. I think it's 4 o'clock. Yes, 4 o'clock. Okay. Thank you so much for coming.